Welcome, viewers, to another edition of It Depends podcast. This one is going to be super exciting because I've got two of my ex-Gartner colleagues on this. As you can see, we've got Donald with a beautiful view of golf course. He's back in Palm Desert. And then we've got Merv Adrian, and this is
Space where I usually live. Yeah.
he's out there. Uh, he took one of the AWS rockets from Project Kuiper, and you see where he's landed.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the other one is, but yeah.
So you can already tell this is going to be entertaining. So with that, the topic for today is we were all at AWS reInvent 2023 in Las Vegas. We just got back to our respective homes, and we are going to talk about what were our findings. So let's start with you, Donald. What's your overall impression? Any three big things that you liked?
Well, I think the first one is that many people understand that generative AI and everything that goes along with it, okay, is way overhyped in today's world. Okay, is it real? Yes. Is it going to have tremendous benefits to IT and to every single person on the planet? Absolutely. In my opinion, it's the biggest thing since the internet revolution, which was the biggest thing since the industrial revolution. Okay, and it's bigger than either of those, or will be. It's years away from fruition across everybody in every walk of life, but it is that important. And yes, they talked about it a lot. Yes, they're incorporating it into almost every single product that we talked about, every single product that we saw, their infrastructure and everything else. But they did also talk about other things. So the balance, I think, was good. Yes, we heard a lot about Q, which is their what do you call it? English language?
Natural language.
Yeah, natural language. But I think that balance is important, because they've come out with a lot of features in the database management area. Okay, they've expanded on zero ETL, which is now coming in from Dynamo and coming in from other products. Okay, they're expanding greatly on the graph database and Neptune and the capabilities within Neptune. They're going to multi-region copies for distributed transactions, as well as really strong redundancy outside of even a single data center or a single zone. Many of those features, they talked about all those too. It wasn't just about generative AI, and I think that's important. Secondly, I also think that you've seen this with some of the vendors out there, that some of them are narrowing themselves down to a single large language model, a single way of doing generative AI, instead of giving the users or their clients choice. One of the things that I noticed at Oracle Cloud World was that Oracle's making multiple ones available. Well, Amazon didn't disappoint. There were 6 of them available before the conference. There are now 12 available, either in GA or in preview. And they're offering clients choice, which I think is extremely important. That's because clients don't want to be told you have to do this. Okay, and I'll leave it to you to figure out who the others are that are doing that. But I think that was very important. And then, they didn't disappoint on the hardware space. That's not my area. In fact, it's really not any of our area on this call. But from from an infrastructure standpoint, they announced new processors, faster processors, larger GPU sets of their own design, and all of that reducing the overall cost to the client. So Amazon has continued to demonstrate that they continue to pay attention to and attempt to reduce the overall cost to the clients. And I think those are the big takeaways that I had.
That's right. Merv, what about yourself?
Yeah, I largely agree with Donald. I might add a gloss or two on a couple of the points. I've spent a lot of my time thinking about the graph database. So the stuff we heard about Neptune was good. They've added analytics. which is an important move, especially in light of the fact that Mongo made an announcement not too long ago about their addition of analytics. But one of my favorite moments of the entire graph discussion was when one of their principal architects was quoted as saying, the trouble with the phrase graph database, well, there's two. One is the word graph and the other is the word database, which I thought was perfectly phrased, because they continue, as does the whole graph database industry, to have the issue of overcoming resistance to what's perceived as a complex and fundamentally different way of doing things. And this is where one of the opportunities in their application of expert system technology and Code Whisperer and Q and all the other pieces they were talking about begin to offer some promise, not just for graph, but for many other areas that Amazon's customers struggle with. How much advice can we give them? How easy can we make it for them to consume our services? A lot of people move to the cloud thinking, great, I don't have to think about hardware anymore. And then they look at the list of 342 different instance types they have to choose from just to deploy an application. So some of that stuff is going to get easier. However, I think it's important, when we think about Q and how pervasive it's intended to be as an advisor to AWS customers, that it's not evident at this stage of the discussion from them who exactly owns what pieces of Q. Q is a beast that will extend its tentacles into every single place that you interact with AWS. Who owns the knowledge and the dialogue that comes out of that connection? Well, clearly the endpoints are the points where the expertise happen. And so they're going to provide some kind of socket for this engine. But building those connections point by point, we're already watching this played out. Donald pointed out zero ETL, which started with 2 connections from one thing to one other thing, is now up to a half dozen, several of which are still only in preview. And there are many, many, many more that have to come. This is the wave of integration that AWS and Google and Microsoft are going through. They've built up these piece parts. Now they've got to put them together coherently. So it was welcome to hear the emerging story of Data Zone and how it's going to subsume all the pieces that they've got, like Glue and Lake Formation and other catalogs and other part. Something has to, despite people loving to quote, there's no one ring to rule them all. We do need a place where governance gets integrated, and that's going to take a long time and a lot of effort. So that's a big one. And so the last one I would add here is, it was very welcome to see how focused and aggressive they are on partnerships. We saw several key partners on stage. Not surprisingly, NVIDIA was on stage. I think they go to every event in every continent, in every market, every day. But it's really important to understand how pervasive the partnership mentality has become at AWS. They are not a closed environment at all. And they're very eager to position themselves as being willing to work with and incidentally make money from lots of partners. And they constantly remind us, again, of a point that Donald made. Customer choice is where they like to hang their hat. We know our customers want choice. We know they have already implemented stuff that they want to work with their other stuff, and we're going to help them make that happen. It's a useful posture for them, and it was very, very much in evidence here.
That's great. So from my side, to add to all the excellent points you made, so I'd add a few other things that stood out from our data and analytics point of view. So the 3 that I have are Aurora Serverless Limitless Database. I want to talk about Redshift, some enhancements in Redshift, and then vector databases. So talking about limitless database, so what was announced was that Aurora Serverless can now automatically shard as the volume goes up. It can shard horizontally, and then within each partition, it can vertically scale. So this used to be a very manual effort, trying to figure out what is the logic of sharding, put it in the application. Now they've taken that away and they call it limitless. Still single writer, but that writer can abstract writes into multiple shards.
And all the big customers who've already sharded are going to have to figure out how to use this new thing, because if they've already written all this stuff, now what? So yeah, there's some issues there, but yeah.
And the second thing that also stood out was how they're starting to use these LLMs inside, like behind the scenes. So Q is in front of the customer to ask questions, and then behind the scenes in Redshift, the concurrency scaling used to happen based on the number of users, but now with this new LLM integration, it can detect if the volume of data is starting to rise, then it can predictively start adding some additional nodes and then help scale. So I think they call it Redshift AI optimizations.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the third thing is we saw vector embeddings being added in more databases. Postgres, so Aurora Postgres and RDS Postgres is being added into document databases, MemoryDB for Redis. Yeah, and where they don't have vector embeddings, I found this very interesting. Now you can create a user-defined function that makes an API call to SageMaker Jumpstart, where all these models that Donald talked about, the 6 from 6 different companies, they all sit there. So you can say, go make an API call and translate this document or do sentiment analysis. And so they're following this very interesting connecting different components. So there's a lot of emphasis like zero ETL on different parts.
Lots of work to do. I'll just add one thing to what you said, and that has to do with vectors. I've been saying since we first started talking about it that vector databases are not a market, they're a feature. I'm going to amend that now and say they're not a product, they're a feature. There's going to be and the language that they used repeatedly was not, we're going to put a vector database in. What they said, we're going to put a vector store in to the DBMSs they have. And I think increasingly that is the way we'll see this play out. And it will be the point of connection between some of these external engines and the operational engines that they're going to be supplementing to fulfill the pathway that you're describing. I've got something over here that can do that feature for me. You know, for those of us who are as old as Donald and me and you, these are like exits. We go out to do some external function and we bring the results back in. Everything old is new again.
Yeah, I think you got to be a little bit careful because first of all, okay, Amazon, and I want to make this really clear, Amazon's not the first and certainly not the last to do this, okay? I mean, Oracle announced exactly the same thing with vectors being supported in the Oracle database and in fact in MySQL HeatWave already, okay? Yep. Not a vector database, but in fact, I agree with you. It's not a vector DBMS. In fact, it is a vector option in the current database management system. So, but Amazon's not the first, and I'm sure some of the others are already working on doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
and just supporting vectors. So I think that's an important thing to bring up. I'm not saying that Amazon's not doing it right. I'm just saying they're certainly not the only ones. Yeah,
absolutely.
But talking about like this different strategies that people are adopting, either native vector embeddings or making this API call, the option that we learned was this very interesting option where you've got this extreme scale key value data store called DynamoDB. Instead of adding vector embeddings inside of DynamoDB, what they're doing is they've done a zero ETL to OpenSearch, and OpenSearch is Elastic or Elasticsearch. So now they can send data, CDC data into Elastic or OpenSearch, which was anyway a search database, inverted search, and now it has vector embeddings. So instead of adding analytics into DynamoDB, you can now do it in OpenSearch.
Dynamo is, of course, one of the interesting little pieces of color from this. those of us who've been watching it for a while, like all of us, remember how a few years ago they would come with great pride and talk about the amazing things that happened on Prime Day, and they would explain how enormous the spikes were and how easily they handled it. One of the most interesting conversations we had off on the side this time with one of their team, who said, we don't even notice it anymore. We observed the fact that they didn't put out a press release talking about how, yep, we handled another enormous. He said, yeah, it just happens. That casual attitude towards the scale that they've been operating at for several years really speaks volumes, frankly, to how effective that engine has become. And it is really quite a remarkable product.
And remember, it's not only Dynamo into Elasticsearch, but Dynamo into Redshift, also
Yep.
zero ETL.
Yep.
And I know that they haven't put, I don't believe they put vectors in Dynamo yet.
No.
But I would absolutely predict it's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a matter of time.
No question. I mean, and I think you're going to see it with some of their competition doing similar with products like Dynamo, whether it be, key value or whether it be a document database engine. They will all, you're all going to see a lot of them doing it. The difference is that Dynamo is still the most performant database on the planet. Yeah. And the one of the comments that when they were talking to us about how the peaks are no longer peaks, nor do they care, it manages itself. One of the things they said was that Prime Day is no longer the only one doing that scale, that they have several customers who are doing the scale in petabytes and the scale in millions of transactions per second, okay, that Dynamo does in Dynamo. So it's not just Amazon doing it themselves. I always said that that's a great reference. The problem is that if I want to do it in my company, I don't have the developers sitting in the next room. Right. Okay. So Amazon's reference, although it's valid, is not for me good. When I see other companies doing the similar size transactions per second, minute, hour, and the same petabyte scale database engines or databases, then it becomes very real. And that's exactly what's happened with Dynamo.
Actually, Zoom uses Dynamo, and Zoom went from about 30 million customers pre-pandemic overnight almost to 300 million.
Yeah.
And Dynamo just scaled. Now, so one concern I do have is that we are to Dynamo to Redshift, I feel okay. But Dynamo to Elastic, OpenSearch in this case, scares me a bit, because OpenSearch is not meant for the scale at which Dynamo can send data. Elasticsearch was built to index Wikipedia pages and your product catalog, so you could do a search. Now all of a sudden you're connecting apples and oranges through zero ETL. How is this going to work and scale? And
remember something. The lady GM at the data Q&A session on Tuesday night, she made a comment that it's zero ETL into Redshift. Okay, yeah. It's pipelines into search, so it's a bit different. And I'm sure that reason for that is to make sure that search can handle the loads that are coming into it.
Well, and the other dimension is that the use cases with search are a little different than the already built dashboards and standard reporting and ad hoc analytics being done typically with a data warehouse. So they're used in slightly different ways. They've got some room there. One of the other intriguing little moments was in the discussion of serverless scale up for Postgres, for example. One of the more interesting commentaries in the press the next day was, now you can watch your transactions scale infinitely, and your prices too. There's going
no your cost, not your
costs, not your prices. Thank you. Good point. There's going to be a very significant wave of sudden awareness of the volumes that people are starting to think about not being free. Amazon's done a great deal to reduce costs. They came up with another new storage tier that's dramatically less expensive and dramatically better performing than the standard S3 tier is. And they've already got customers who are very happy with it. And they're going to need to keep doing that. And to Donald's point, from day one, they've always been out there delivering steadily reductions in price for some of these infrastructure services. And they're going to have to continue to, because people's usage is going to grow, and they don't want a massive wave of sticker shock in their customer base. So they're going to have to watch that.
I have to say,
the message, by the way, to all the people watching this: financial governance is the number one issue, the number one concern for every single user and customer of any cloud service or cloud services, because most people are multi-cloud. There's no question in my mind. That is the number one thing that everybody in IT is going to have to start paying attention to, or the CFOs are going to be walking into the CIO's office with either a whip or a gun, that is going to be so bad. That is the, if you want to call it, frontier of the next 2 to 3 years is going to be that.
Both your points, I was actually surprised to see how AWS executives opened up with new announcements for price and performance, followed by ease of use. In the past, that we've been going to reInvent for so many years. It always used to be about, here is a new database, here is a new service. And
how cool is this? Yeah.
And now it's
they're also hitting the boundary that I've told people for years. You need as many copies of the data as you need, and not one more. They have been proliferating different engines and different stores for specialized purposes. And the thing that people really, really have to watch out for is, don't make multiple copies if you don't have to make multiple copies. Occasionally, it will make sense to use a different format and have a redundant copy of data, but be very, very wary of having too many, because those prices are going to go up. Those costs are going to go up, very rapidly if you don't watch that. This is one of the opportunities, and I think we heard them beginning to talk about this, because they have, as they like to call it, instrumented the fleet, because they have captured usage statistics. They can, in fact, begin to provide guidance back, not just for optimizing a single engine or choosing among engines, but to say, in fact, multiple people are going after this thing in multiple places. We can, in fact, come up with ways to consolidate this, to reduce redundancies, and not just simple data deduplication, but even functional deduplication, where we've solved this problem 3 times. We don't need to solve it again. Use that one. I think we'll see more and more of that guidance-based interaction, not in 24, maybe not even in 25, but it's coming.
Very nice. So I want to change tracks and talk about the keynote. So Donald, I want to start with you. What did you think about the keynote?
Well, I mean, over the years, I've come to expect that the CEO's keynote, which is Tuesday morning in this particular case, and it was when Andy was doing it too, is really just, here's all the new stuff that we're doing, and here's why we're doing it. Some vision in there, but most of it was, well, we're excited to announce this, we're excited to announce that. Here's our new Glacier pricing for storage. Now they just announced another new Super Glacier that's going to be even less, this time around. And so it's really trying to put into perspective all of the announcements that are being made across all the parts of Amazon, and then throw in a few customers. And I think that was very good. I will say that usually when I hear a customer coming out on stage, that's when I go get a cup of coffee or go to the bathroom. This time, I have to say, I think pretty much in the keynote, all the customers they brought out were phenomenal. And really had something to say. The key to the highlight to me was the CTO of Pfizer, or the analytics person from Pfizer. But every single customer that came out on the stage with Adam, I thought was really good and added value to the keynote. So it wasn't just a, gee, look at me, I did all this great stuff. It was, why did I do it? How did we do it? how did we work with Amazon on it, which gives a lot of I think hands-on or how to do it type advice to the people that are listening, in addition to we announced this, and we announced that, and we announced this, which is what the typical keynote has been in the past. So
it was one thing
from that standpoint, it was very good.
One thing that really jumped out at me that warmed my heart as a data guy, like you guys, to hear the CEO get up there and say unequivocally, your data is your differentiator, and it's our job to make sure it's up to date, complete, and discoverable. To make that ringing a statement about the centrality of data to their story, it warmed my heart, and it's good to see he's got religion on that one. So yeah.
Well, the problem is, Merv, not problem, but the good news is that finally they're listening to us, because we all have been saying that for 15 years. So
what struck me, Donald, was this came in the context of a moment when the story is and was for everybody. Look at Gen AI, how great it is, and it's going to change everything. But he didn't let the moment go by without saying it's still all about the data that underlies this. And it was good to hear that reaffirmed.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not trying to minimize the fact that they've all of a sudden gotten religion about data, but remember something: AI has always been about the data. Gen AI takes that to the next level with the LLMs, the large language models. You're talking about petabytes of data, which you must have to train the models. And so it's, yes, I'm glad they got religion on data, but they have no choice, because finally everything they're pushing and everything that's in the forefront today is all about data. And the people who benefit from Gen AI, okay, especially everybody on the planet, they're not going to pay attention to the data. They don't have to pay attention to the data. That's being done behind the scenes. When you run ChatGPT, most of the people that are experimenting and playing with ChatGPT and saying, write me an essay for this, or write me a paragraph for this, or do my advertising, they don't care. They don't know what the model is. They don't care. But under that, there's petabytes of data. And finally, everybody's realizing in the IT world that data is where it's at.
And by the way, it was interesting to see AWS putting out some effort at defending their flanks. They haven't really talked much about competition in the past. There were a few little subtle shots about availability made, which we can come back to if you want to. But the other
one anyway. I will not forget.
The other one I thought that was interesting was how aggressively they pursued their role as a place for innovators. They were a great pride in, and it was in Adam's keynote that they made the point that, as he said, 80% of unicorns are running on AWS. Now, that doesn't mean they're running exclusively on AWS, and that subtlety is sometimes lost, but they want to be there. Sanjeev, I'm talking over you. Go ahead.
I am talking over you, but I thought there was a little bit, they went a little too far. We are the best, we are the only ones. For example, we are on the 4th generation of our chips. In 5 years, others have not even started. And, Gaia just came out last week from Microsoft, and then TPUs have existed for a long time from Google Cloud. On Monday night keynote, Peter DeSantis talked about how 20 minutes, how they had synchronized clocks between different data centers. Google Cloud did it 10 years ago with True Time. So
more than 10. You're losing track of time.
Yeah.
Aren't we all? Yeah.
I felt there was a little bit too much, like from not talking about competition to talking about competition more, and that too not fully accurate.
Well, but so Sanjeev, I think you've been around as long as we have. Name one vendor that's absolutely accurate about their competition. They're purposely leaving things out because they want to look better. I mean, this is normal for every vendor. So it's not just Amazon or just one of the others. It's all of them. They do this normally.
Yeah.
That's why we all here have a job, because it's our job to go back and tell our customers what's right, what's real, and what's not real.
We are salt dispensers. Take this with a grain of salt, please. Yeah.
And talking about that, we had a Q&A session with the CEO first, and then with the AI team. And one question that came up was that Amazon Q, which is this natural language assistant where you can ask any sort of questions, is we couldn't understand how do you make a leap from an application, AI application, to where the data is. Because the data is either unstructured on S3 or mostly structured data is on Redshift. Neither of them have any vector capabilities at this point. So how is this search ever coming to that? And then the second problem that also came up in that session was, where is the metadata? The data zone is not really part of this queue and vector story. So how does the question know where to find the data? Because the business glossary is in data zone, the sources are spread all over. There's just so many 15 different databases. How, if I ask a question about a customer, how do I know? Is this customer in Aurora or Redshift or
They did show an example of that, right? They showed a demo during the other keynotes of one of those multi-source questions. And to Donald's point, this is one of those things where, well, you leave some things out when you tell these stories. There are some places where this is already working. There are other places where they haven't even begun to build the connections yet. And yeah, it's going to take a while for this to roll out. The key is, I think, that the well-worn paths will get paved first, as they always do. And the good news is that much of the foundational work that gets done for those paths will, in fact, turn out to be reusable in other places. So it'll be an incremental strategy, no question about it. And I think their customers get that. Some of the folks who are doing it now are really pioneering and may very well be doing stuff that Amazon hasn't done itself yet and will pick up on themselves. And I think that may be one of the bigger stories of the whole Gen AI thing, is how rapidly we've gone from one or two model names that people knew about to, as Donald said, here's a dozen models we now support, foundation models, right? More to come, and they're coming from everywhere. They're coming from some big players, but they're also coming from small groups, often using the open source model to create highly specialized foundation models that are usable in very specific cases. I think there's going to be an explosion of this stuff, and there's a whole new industry of evaluating models waiting to be had.
Yep, model evaluation came up. Yes, which model to use. In fact, so we haven't talked about Bedrock. Bedrock, we mentioned SageMaker earlier. SageMaker is to build and deploy Gen AI, and Bedrock is where you've got the LLMs and training of the models, inferencing. So, yeah.
And a topic that hasn't come up yet, but will start to come up as this stuff gets deployed, is architectural drift in the models themselves. There's a whole bunch of talk about drift in models, but it's not going to just be about the knowledge that's inside them. It will be about the changes resulting from their use, the changes in their growing user community and the use cases they're used for, and the resultant changes in physical implementation that those things drive. If people don't keep up with this, if the pilot just goes into production and doesn't get looked at again until it starts to fail, that's going to be a big loss for a lot of people. So they're going to have to figure out what that ongoing ops piece is going to look like.
You know, what you just said made me think of something else too. There was one thing that I think was missing from just about everywhere, and especially the CIO's keynote. He mentioned how great it was that he's met with Biden and he's met with the Premier of England.
Yep.
Okay. Am I about setting up AI? And my answer is, so what?
Trust.
Because the President of the United States and the Premier of England is not going to set those laws.
Yeah.
What I want to know is, what is Amazon as a company doing in lobbying and working with the lawmakers in all of the major countries? That includes, I mean, I did talk to the head of APJ for Amazon, and they actually have a whole group of people in APJ that are working with the legislatures in many different countries throughout Asia and Australia, New Zealand, everywhere, okay, because they look at it as so important, because they know that if the companies don't get involved in this, the governments are going to legislate. You're going to have as many different laws as there are countries or states and everything else, and it's going to be a total disaster. And I think that the big vendors, the big companies, the hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, have got to get together and work with all the different countries. Or if you remember, when GDPR came in and California put in CPDA, okay, everybody said, oh my God, there's going to be 49 more laws, one in each state. Now, thank goodness it hasn't happened, but if it did, consider the nightmare that that would be for your IT department if you're a small company and you want to do business in every state in the United States. Well, now consider what happens if I'm doing AI as a big company. Let's say I'm doing Q as Amazon, and I all of a sudden have to listen to and adhere to the laws in the over, 350 countries in the world today. That's going to be a total disaster. And I don't think they addressed it at all.
Yeah, and I can see why, because if you look at the culture of AWS, especially AWS compared to even other cloud providers, they had this culture of, we will provide you with a tool set and we will keep innovating and we'll give you the best tool set. You want a database? Here, you get a new one and you get a new one. Now, to move up the stack, you need some sort of like governance and common standards. Otherwise, everybody has to experiment.
There was a time when dystopian science fiction posited a world run by a few large corporations, and then it got supplanted by a dystopian science fiction narrative that said, no, it's the rise of the machines we have to worry about. What we're beginning to understand are those are actually the same thing, because it's going to be those large corporations that own those large machines, and law always lags technology deployment. And so where are the governments going to go to get the advice about how to do this? To the same companies they have to be worried about regulating. So this is going to be a very interesting dimension for humanity to navigate as we get into systems that nobody but the machines understands. How do you define regulations for that environment? Well, you go ask them, and that may not be the best answer.
Yeah, and it comes under the title of explainable AI, and having the AI, all of the AI algorithms, all of the large language models, all of the vector searches and everything else that's working with the large language models, all of that's going to have to start explaining itself. And as it becomes more sophisticated, because effectively what you're doing is you're starting to even see the world narrow down to 5 or 6 vendors. So, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger in Exterminator, but instead of one mountain, there's 5 or 6. And that's really what we're looking at.
We saw a little of this recently at the IBM event that took place just recently, because some of their specific development of models is about models that are designed to create reports suitable for the auditing agencies to whom they have to be submitted, right? And they're actually, because they have so many customers for whom this is an issue, they're actually building some of their AI technology specifically to explain what just happened to the regulators. So, yeah.
At this AWS event, I was talking to one of ex-Gartner colleague who's on the infrastructure side, and he was telling me that his big concern is what is going to be in near term the role of network engineer. Like he said, we spent so much time writing firewall policies and all kinds of roles and access control and all of that. A lot of that stuff is just manual or slow, and AI is starting to supplant it. It's able to either determine from the usage and behavior, or you can do an LLM request and say, go do this for me. So it makes me wonder what jobs, what roles, like software development, how important is software development going to be in a few years?
And when does the system start coming back and saying, A, I don't think you're allowed to do that, B, I don't think you should be, and C, I'm not going to do it? What do you think of that?
Well, and here's what's going to happen, and this is where I think the pervasiveness of generative AI is probably not yet well understood by the public, is that the answer to your question, software engineers at the vendors are going to continue to have a job.
The vendor.
Yes.
Programmers at companies are not, because as we even heard, the direction that Amazon's heading is that between low code, no code, and everything else that's going on, you won't need those people anymore.
Right. Tell it what
Okay,
you want.
but more important, next is building generative AI into networking platforms and security platforms, so that you take the people out of the security altogether, and the generative AI is going to do the security monitoring, the flagging, the red flags that go up, and everything else. Now, effectively, what I'm saying is you've put a computer in charge of security, not a person.
The stakes become really, really high, because if my adversaries' computers are more advanced and developed better than mine, then my computer-based defenses may not be as good as I think they are.
But if I have an AI monitoring that, Merv, then mine are going to learn, and it's only going to take one small violation, and I've got that hole plugged, and now they're going to have to develop another one, or I'm going to have to plug another hole. So that starts to become a learning experience on both sides. Okay, and where does that go?
I will point out that Doctor Who predicted this a long time ago. When you take out a Cyberman, the next Cyberman already knows how to defend against what you used on him.
That's right. That's right.
I also saw demos where Q can now pick the right instance size. It automatically scales. So figures out the indexes. So a lot of these things that we used to do manually are now done. In fact, at the IBM AI Day, Merv, you and I were at, I was asking, how are you training IBM's Granite model? They're like, oh, we're using an LLM. I'm like, no. How are you, before you create an LLM? They're like, no, we use the LLM's inference to create data, synthetic data, and train it.
This is the scary part, machines building machines, right? This is what we've always said is the omega point for all this, right? Is when they start designing and building themselves instead of us. That's where it starts to get scary.
Well, and that's why I found it so interesting that when we asked the question of one of their CTOs who was giving us our introduction briefing on Monday night, where did the name Q come from?
Yes.
And his answer was James Bond. Sorry, no. It came from Star Trek, because Q was the ultimate knowledge of the whole world, and able to move through it and everything else.
And was not always acting in our best interests.
No, not at all. And clearly Q came from that, and not from Q and James Bond. Now, he happened to be British, so I understand why he said that. But in fact, it's quite clear that this came from the Star Trek character Q, who, by the way, is one of the only, if not the only, character that's been in every single offshoot of Star Trek, and regardless, including the latest one.
Every single one. Yeah,
that's right.
Because the James Bond Q, Dennis, some guy, he passed away.
They had another Q in the new movies. It's just that he was the guy that came up with all the goodies, like, the car with the ejection seat and all that. Got nothing to do with this Q, for sure.
Was there anything that you were expecting, or was it all predictable before you went to the event? Either one of you?
I have to say that when I look back about a year, 18 months ago, people hadn't even heard of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you look at what's happened in the last 6 to 8 months, and it is that short of a time frame, and in fact, it's a year, because it was right around Christmas last year when all the hype right after Christmas started coming out about ChatGPT. You look at the speed of the innovation that's taken place. There was basically one large language model a year ago. Now there's what, 20, 30 of them out there. the speed of innovation because of this whole movement,
Yeah.
I have to say, nothing surprises me anymore. And no, there wasn't. I mean, they came out with stuff that I hadn't thought about. Okay, not just in Gen AI, but other things too. And I have to say that very little surprises me anymore after watching what's happened in the last 12 months.
I have two observations for you. One was to Donald's point, they were actually at great pains to show timelines multiple different times about how they'd been working on some of these things for a long time while we still weren't paying attention.
Even if you couldn't read the slide because it was so all the stuff was on it.
Yeah. And the other was I'm still struck by their determination with their Kuiper project to compete on the how many satellites can we put in the air and compete with somebody else. I don't know how much this business really matters. I think it'll be useful for them. It'll be very expensive, and I'm wondering if the reasons they're doing it are not mostly about executive level competition, as opposed to.
See, I would disagree. I would disagree there on the Amazon side.
Good.
And the reason is, and I mentioned this to them, and they said, "Yeah, you're right." Okay. Their satellites are for their customers.
Right.
They're not selling satellite bandwidth to the public. It's for users of Amazon Web Services. The other company you're referring to is putting up that network of satellites to sell satellite bandwidth to anyone who wants to buy it. That's a different business than why Amazon's putting theirs up. Now, they may pivot to it. Who knows? They've done that before. Now they have a pharmacy on Amazon.com, and other stuff like that. So they could pivot to selling satellite bandwidth, but that's not the purpose of what they're doing right now.
And at least they'll have space planes, so you can go up and check on your notes and see how they're doing. Yeah.
And I also don't think Adam's going to swear at his advertisers either.
Yeah, that is true.
Oh my God! Did you see that clip? Oh my.
Yep. We don't need to mention the name. We're on a podcast, but I'm sure everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yes.
So.
It's okay. We're talking about Elon Musk. Starlink is and what he said about Bob Iger of Disney.
Yeah, go blank yourself. Yes, that was a lovely moment. I very very classy executive.
Yeah, that's a good way to. It's a good way to keep your job. Hopefully, they're going to fire his back end as soon as possible.
Talking about how big Amazon does things, and like you mentioned, pharmacy, but in the delivery space, the news that came out today is that as of now, the largest delivery transportation company in this country, US, is Amazon. It beat out.
Judging by the trucks we passed on our way home, I can believe that.
How many? I mean, we didn't count, Sanjeev, but going back and forth, driving between Palm Springs and Vegas and back, we must have seriously passed somewhere between 50 and 75 semi trucks on the road in the short time that we were on the road.
I have to comment on one other thing that all three of us participated in. We all went over and saw the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is really quite cool. Extraordinarily expensive, as all things in Vegas are, but a remarkable demonstration of the technology. Also, one of the great little PR coups of the week, because at one point, our friends at Google had in fact run ads on the Sphere for Google Cloud during reInvent. So that was pretty funny. I liked seeing a little bit of that back and forth happening. That was fun.
No, that was actually one of the best things I've seen the whole week was the Google Cloud ads on the outside of the Sphere during Amazon's reInvent conference. And I will tell you, okay, I just found out from my son, who's a fish head, that Fish has now officially announced that they will do 4 shows in April in the Sphere, April 24.
When do we get tickets?
Oh, he's already signed up for the lottery because that's what it is.
Sounds good.
Yeah, the Sphere was quite a marvel, especially because it's connected now with a footbridge to the Venetian, where the conference was, and the Wynn, where we were for the Analyst Summit. So it was like in your face, it's just giant orb of colors and display.
But I know this isn't a travel podcast, but I will give one piece of advice to anyone who goes to Las Vegas. don't stay on the backside of the Palazzo Hotel because the sphere is in your face all night long.
Yeah, it's here, the sphere.
The thing the city of Las Vegas was recovering from, and I heard so many complaints from Uber drivers and others, the F1
The
race.
Formula One. Yeah.
That seems to have caused massive havoc with construction and road closure.
It takes months to set it up, and I am told it takes months to set it.
You can't see
down.
Yeah, you can't see the beautiful front of the Bellagio right now. They're still taking down all the seating they put up there.
And they're going to start building it again in 6 months because they're going to do it again next year. So,
yep. Boy.
They have a 10-year contract.
Be careful what you wish for. Yeah.
Yeah. So next year, reInvent, do you have any like prediction? I know it's hard to do predictions, but any thoughts on what do you think we'll see next year? Will GenAI still be this hot, or will it be hotter? So
I think by this time next year, we will have seen one or two massive negative events happen. Failures, or ludicrously designed efforts in this space, because everybody's going all in. Nobody really knows how it works yet. And many of the necessary guardrails, that's actually the title of one of the products we saw, are in place to ensure that things are done the correct way. I think the stakes are very high, and the mistakes will be very high too.
Well, it's not just mistakes. I also think that we've only seen the beginning of the bad actors using this. And I think that's going to be one of the major issues that's going to come up and actually slow down the adoption of generative AI is going to be the bad actors that are going to start to serve, that have already started to surface, but I mean, in multiply through this. And I will make one prediction. Next year in Las Vegas, you're going to have Google Cloud Next, you're going to have Oracle Cloud World, and you're going to have reInvent. One of those three, if not more, of the keynotes will be in the sphere.
Oh, wow.
I can almost guarantee it's going to be Larry Ellison or Thomas Kurian or Adam, how do you pronounce his last name? Slipsky. One of those three will be doing their keynote from the sphere, if not more than one.
You think Mark Benioff is going to let them get there first?
Mark Benioff has decided to stay in San Francisco.
I know. But, that doesn't mean he can't give a keynote at the Sphere. That would even be cooler.
But I definitely think that's going to happen. It has to. It just has to.
So Databricks will also be in San Francisco. It's always been there. Snowflake, surprisingly, has moved back from Las Vegas to San Francisco. So Snowflake's...
Well, there's been a lot of lobbying done by the mayor and the governor of California, which is the main reason Salesforce is staying there. And I'm sure why Databricks is moving back. And I mean, Snowflake is moving back. So,
so repatriation has more than one meaning, at least in San Francisco. Yeah.
Yes. They're going to ship
all three of us are sitting in California, and look at it this way. Our GDP is larger than, I think it's the 8th or 9th largest if it was compared to a country. Right. So.
Yes.
And I hear the debate last night was quite interesting. I haven't gone back to watch it yet between Florida and California, but it'll be...
That wasn't the word that some of my friends used, but anyway, we'll let that go.
Yeah, right.
So before this turns into an all-in podcast, I think we end here.
Well, see, this is your fault, Sanjeev, because you brought the three of us together for this.
No, this is the most entertaining thing I've done all day, So thank you so much for making this so much fun.
Oh, you need to make your life more interesting, man, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope you have a good weekend, Sanjay, and thank you. And if you want to do this again anytime, just send us a note.
Okay, awesome.
See you guys. Have a good one.
Yep.
Happy weekend.
Bye-bye, everybody. Yeah, bye-bye, everybody.